Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the extent to which foreigners, particularly Chinese, Indians, and any rich oligarchs from wherever that are buying up real estate all across the Western world. Now, there's certainly plenty of it going on, but for years now, and it's been happening for a long time. Now the prices are being affected by higher interest rates. Western governments, almost in unison, suggesting that it's coordinated from a central script, almost universally looking at changing ownership laws, residential real estate ownership laws. So in places like Britain, Canada, and Australia, and so on. There's laws now to either they're being proposed or have already been passed to limit or prevent, in some cases, the ownership of residential real estate by offshore buyers. And that, on the face of it, they're making a big deal of it. So we're doing this to help the citizens and to make real estate more affordable. Young people can't afford to do it. Make rents more affordable, and housing crisis, yada yada yada. So now this is all a sham. It's all window dressing. It's all bullshit. It's all lies. It's all talk about misrepresentation that the media should be jumping all over and really going to make a chase on them, but the international real estate market is globalist controlled, as indeed are the mainstream media. So no one's really calling this out. But just looking at the real estate or how it's been handled up until now, or before any of these laws, foreign owners, and this could be Chinese Communist Party generals and rich Indian Brahmins who own monopolies and this sort of thing. They've all come into the West buying up vast amounts of property. When I say vast amounts, I'm talking 100, 200, 300 or more freestanding properties that are being bought up by some of these people. Now, a lot of it's money laundering. Their gains are fairly illicit, and so they're busy laundering their money through real estate buying and selling in the West. They can also gain substantial capital appreciation in the process. But I again, speaking Chinese, I've gone around and looked at auctions, housing auctions in, say, Sydney, and in areas that the Chinese favour, and you can walk from one to one. So it's the Chinese general with his interpreter there, and they just walk from one property to the next. They don't even bother going inside to look. They're just walking from one property to the next. Don't care what they pay, and they'll pay double, triple the initial asking price. They just don't give a shit. So you go to properties that when I first started looking, that were say were $250,000 listed, and the Chinese guy would be paying $650,000 for a $250,000 property. So they're more than happy to pay far over the card. And they in the end, the local people are dropping out by the first few bids. The local people are being knocked out of and it's a bidding war between offshore buyers. And you can have maybe a couple of Chinese competing with each other, or the Russian oligarch and the Chinese people, and they're the only ones left bidding, because they don't have to make their money working a 9 to 5 job and bringing up the family and sweating over every phone bill when it arrives or something like that. So they're completely different people. Now to allow them, or to make it easy for them to compete directly with just mums and dads on a 9 to 5 job who are trying to compete to buy a property with a multi-gazillionaire, monopolist from some corrupt bullshit third world dictatorship thing. Yeah, I mean, that was absurd, and it's just at the outset. But yet Western governments everywhere, Australia included, allowed it. And some of this was for the people in the body politic, the politicians, who were very well looked after by this. They'd buy some rubbish property somewhere for $1 million, and then they'd sell it a year later to some Chinese investor, some multi-gazillionaire investor. They sell it for $5 million, so they've made a massive windfall profit. And the property was never worth $5 million or anywhere near it. But they were able to, at the very outset, some of these properties maybe $1.5 million, even on an absolute good year, but they were selling it for 3 and 4 times what it's worth to these offshore investors. So the people in the body politic allowed it. The other side of it was, again, a lot of politicians, local politicians, not only here but elsewhere around the Western world, invested heavily in residential real estate for rental. So they would be able to rent the properties for many times what they could have years before. And most politicians, if not nearly all politicians, are heavily invested in real estate, and the majority of their income doesn't come from their salary representing the people anymore, but it comes from flipping real estate or having large real estate holdings and receiving the rental income. So this is something that the politicians clambered all over, and it's been in their interest to keep it going. So anyway, they've brought out these laws, and again, some are already in existence, or some are working their way through the parliament to ostensibly stop foreign buyers from buying up swathes of real estate. But I don't think it's a serious attempt to begin with. But let's just have a look at how practical it is in the real world. Firstly, the foreigners that have bought up hundreds upon hundreds of properties of real estate, there's nothing retrospective. It doesn't apply to them. So it only applies to future purchasing. Now, it only applies to a foreign national wanting to buy a property. It doesn't apply to someone who has a residency permit or a work residency permit or a student permit. So if you've got any of those things, which is how nearly all these foreign nationals get here in the first place anyway, if you have any of these things, whether it be a temporary residence permit, you're allowed to buy property there, and then as much property as you want. There's no limit on it. You're not allowed to only buy one property or something. You can buy hundreds, and so the restriction on the foreigners is about zip. And anyway, a gazillionaire, Communist Party general can send his son to study in Australia. As soon as he gets a student permit, he can then buy hundreds of properties, which effectively the family owns. So again, the restrictions are just bullshit. They're just nonsense. Now, on top of that, something that the Chinese and the Indians do in particular is the rich Brahmin Indians, they use what they call nominees. So someone's cousin or anyone relative in the family and that they treat second and third cousins as family. Some of these people, or someone from the tribal village, they get a residency permit in Australia or a citizenship even, and they then buy property on behalf of the entire village and the entire wider family. So you'll get someone who's works in the post office for less than the average wage, that somehow manages to own 150 properties. And for reasons that are completely unknown to me, our taxation office and those sort of people. How can you own 150 properties on the wage of a postal worker, a clerk and a postal? Now, if those questions got asked, then it would say, well, actually, my family from overseas is giving me all this money to go and buy property. Okay, well, then you don't own the property, they own it. And we're going to put a stop to that, and you're going to have to sell all that property right now. So, there are ways that easily they could stop this offshore buying. So really this idea of saying, well, we won't let foreign nationals buy property, it has no effect at all and will have no effect. Now, there are some other things that are being considered, and I think there's a couple of provinces in Canada maybe looking at this, if they haven't already done it, where one of the big problems with the offshore investors, they buy up all this property. It's just investment. Leave the properties empty. So you've got thousands upon thousands of apartments and so on, and freestanding properties that are empty, or that they bought in a rundown condition and they don't bother renovating to a habitable standard. These empty properties are just everywhere, and and they're not being used. Now that means effectively they're taken out of the rental market, or they're not available for sale either, and they're kept specifically as an investment, or for these offshore people to put their peasant workers into 100 to a room and all this sort of stuff. So it's a scam. That's a scam, and a scam of the first order as well. But so what they're looking at doing, and again, I think in some areas of Canada they already have, is putting a tax on it. So if your property is vacant for longer than X months, you have to pay an additional tax on that property. Now, there's many things that could be done in Australia, as an example. If you own a number of properties, you can use the loss you make on it and the difference between the rent and your cost of owning it. You can, which means people can leverage themselves highly. You can claim the cost back against tax that you pay and any other sources of income. Now, if you've got a 9 to 5 job that maybe is exposed, or you live in the gig economy, you can't really do this because your income is too uncertain. But if you've got a very certain cash flow that you control, some sort of monopoly or drug money or something, I don't know. Yeah, but if you've got a certain type of income, then you can defray your tax, the tax you pay on your profitable income, if you like, against any losses you incur on the property side. Now, the property is appreciating at leaps and bounds, 10, 15% a year or something in property appreciation. So if you take a loss on the rent, you put your buddies in there, then or you renovate it to a high spec, for example, and take a loss, then that loss can then can act as a write-off against your taxable income. That's called negative gearing in Australia, and so these people, these offshore buyers and their nominees and minions, they exploit this one horribly, so they don't have to pay any tax. And another tax rip-off there, in my view. So there should be a limit on the amount of properties somebody can own. This idea of owning 200 or 300 properties and claiming negative gearing on it's bullshit. But if someone's got 3 children, for example, and they've got a main residence plus 3 others, then that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But beyond that, then it's just purely, in my view, exploitation of the taxpayer. But more importantly, it's preventing properties from being available. It's preventing market forces from operating. Now, market forces in any real estate market operate based on the purchasing power of the local population. As soon as offshore gazillionaires come in buying up thousands of properties, then that delicate market forces sort of equation is torn to pieces, which is what's happened in Australia and indeed all across the Western world. Again, you're looking at properties that that you could buy for $200,000 20 years ago and now worth 2.2, 2.3 million. That's not a natural organic thing. And by the way, if that same property had been subject to the market for the purchasing power of the local population, the marketing forces, it would be somewhere around $350,000. Not even that, $330,000, $320,000 maybe, somewhere in there. If it was if it was dependent only on purchasing power of the local population, in other words, the market-driven purchasing power, but instead it's worth over $2 million only because of offshore purchasing and offshore buyers coming in all cashed up and treating the local real estate in the West as some sort of plaything or toy. So I don't think these measures really will have much of a difference. They're tinkering around the edges. I think the extra taxation on people who leave their apartments, offshore buyers or local nominees, it doesn't matter, but people that leave their apartments empty or their houses empty and not available for sale or for rent. But in a lot of cases, that extra tax they pay on that becomes a tax write-off anyway. So it's not as if they're suffering from it. There needs to be far more rigorous measures, and it needs to be treated as a real issue. The residential real estate is for the local citizenry and must be driven by the local market forces of how much money people make 9 till 5. And when it's tied to that, it then works fine. When it's subject to offshore buying by gazillionaires, then it doesn't work anymore, and the whole idea of affordable housing just disappears. You've been Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.